So today, hope. The Salvation Army, we love the word hope, don't we? I know it was a thing in the Eastern Territory where we adopted for our slogan, hope where it's needed most. Did you guys have that here as well? No? I've seen plenty of people wearing the t-shirts though, right? So it's spread. Salvo's Eastern Territory wasn't the only territory to use hope as part of its slogans and things. The Canadian Territory, their slogan is or was giving hope today, which is a great slogan, as long as you don't need help tomorrow. But what exactly do we mean when we say we give hope? What are we offering? I think to understand this, we might like to backtrack and explore the opposite. To explore a little bit of hopelessness. Sometimes it's easier to understand things that way, you know? Have you ever experienced hopelessness? Sometimes described as a dark time. You know, it's dark because when we experience hopelessness, we find it hard to see into the future. Hard to see if anything is up ahead. It's dark. We stub our toes. And have you ever noticed the longer the dark times last, the more hopeless you begin to feel? Is that everyone else's experience? I mean, I would hope not, but knowing that you're human, I'm pretty sure it is. The harder it is to remember the lighter times in the past, the harder it becomes to imagine lighter times in the future. Dark times where you feel cut off, isolated and alone because you can't quite see how the future is going to be any better. Where it seems like the situation you're in has no end, no possibility of improvement. What is a little bit ironic is the darkest and most hopeless time in my life happened at about 11 a.m. on a very bright and beautiful sunny spring day. I had been in hospital for 2.5 months. I had surgery for an acoustic neuroma. It hadn't gone perfectly, and so far I'd had 2 surgeries to try and fix what didn't go right the first time. And on this particular day, and at this stage, I wasn't in pain particularly. I was fine. I was recovering from a general anaesthetic, but I felt pretty okay. But I was incredibly homesick. I just wanted to get out of that stupid hospital and go home. I wanted to be with my wife and kids at home, not have to them come during visiting hours and for limited amounts of time, and it was a whole thing. So at 11 a.m. on a sunny spring day, the doctor comes in to me and tells me the lab results are back and the latest surgery has not been successful. That the fluid coming out of my nose or things was still brain fluid, and therefore my brain was exposed to the outside world. There was a hole in my head that shouldn't be there. And they couldn't figure it out. But I would have to stay. I was in an isolation ward, so I was only allowed a few people to visit at a particular time. And the worst news was that they weren't sure what they could do. They'd done both things that has worked every other time in the past all around the world. Those 2 things had worked fine, the 2 different surgeries. Usually only one of them was required. I was unique, great. But they were out of ideas. And the doctors even suggested that I pray. You know it's tough when the doctor suggests you pray, right? The hopelessness in that moment descended like darkness. I couldn't see what the future held for me. I couldn't find it, and I was afraid that I would have to live in an isolation bubble for the rest of my life. I actually had in mind one of those Zorb balls, you know, the big clear plastic. I thought I'd have to live in one of those for the rest of my life. Now, I was fortunate. I had visitors who would come and people who would send encouraging messages. They were like little points of light in my dark existence. And that's great. In the same way as Isaiah speaks words of hope and comfort in the middle of darkness and despair. And it's similar, right? Every day out there in our community, we give messages and we give assistance and we give support to people struggling with their circumstances in darkness and hopelessness. We offer assistance to alleviate these things in a little bit, and we provide those little points of light. But that's not exactly the hopelessness that I'm talking about. There is a soul darkness, a soul deep despair, a soul deep hopelessness that we need to address. And this is Isaiah's message. Isaiah's message is spiritual. It's not a simple message about hope in dark circumstances. It is deeper. It addresses a darkness of the soul that builds over time in those circumstances. The ancient people of Israel, to whom Isaiah was writing, tended to interpret everything in their lives through the lens of their relationship with God. Yeah? Their circumstances, good or bad, were a direct result of God's judgment or blessing according to their behavior. Whatever happened to them in their life, it was their fault. God was either punishing them or blessing them. They were responsible. Yeah, I don't know if they'd read the book of Job or plenty of the other wisdom literature in the Old Testament, but that's how they lived, that's how they thought, that's how they felt. And we might look back and think that's completely ridiculous. But I have to admit that on that morning, when I got a bad lab report saying third surgery hadn't been successful, none of the team of doctors knew what to do next, I have to admit I did ask myself, what have I done to deserve this? Have you ever been in a similar situation? Times in your life where you're just stuck, you're under siege, powerless to do anything about it, not sure the future will hold anything, not sure that if things will ever improve, and you're asking yourself, what have I done to deserve this? These are dark, dark times, situations and circumstances that result in a darkness of the soul. What have I done to deserve this? It is a stupid question. Because it presumes that there is an answer. The scripture tells us there isn't. It betrays this inner belief that deep down, somewhere, something that I have done or something that I have failed to do has led me to this dark place. It's all my fault. People who suffer far more trauma than I have, people who suffer abuse and other horrific things, have this same irrational tendency to blame themselves. The hurt, the humiliation, the shame is so great that the brain has to create a story of some kind just to be able to process what's happening. There has to be some sense to it, the brain says. Someone or something has to be to blame. The hurt is so great. And for some reason, we place at least some of the blame on ourselves. What have I done to deserve this? And this is a curse that is carried on long after any of the physical symptoms have disappeared. It is a darkness of the soul. See, something we've experienced, whether it's a difficult medical experience or a trauma of abuse, we have this irrational tendency to believe that we, in some way, are flawed or broken or unworthy of the love and attention of God of the universe. And we begin to believe that we are condemned to this hopeless life of suffering, loneliness, disconnection, and pain. In Israel's case, they believed that they were condemned to a life of exile, of slavery, of disconnection from the homeland, of disconnection from God, and that they would one day ultimately cease to exist. That was what they saw in their hopeless and condemned future. The universe judged them unworthy. God has condemned them. The true power of the message of Isaiah is only grasped when we understand the spiritual nature and the depth of the hopelessness that the Israelites felt and the true nature of the darkness experienced by the people, by us. The hope of Christmas. The hope of Christmas. Because into the darkness of Israel's life, into the darkness of humanity, into the darkness of your life comes a message of Isaiah this Christmas. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle, every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning. They'll be fuel for the fire. It's a message of hope. And it sounds great, but have a look a little bit deeper. Like verse 4. Verse 4 talks of the shattering of a yoke that burdens. A yoke that weighs heavily on the shoulders. The rod used by the oppressor to keep them oppressed. Pair that then with verse 6. These are shoulder verses, right? For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. The government. Well, I mean, we've been through an election yesterday and whatever, governments, right? But what are governments good for? What do we love to do with governments? We blame them. We blame them when things go wrong, right? I know there's probably other purposes to a government. But the responsibility, the authority, therefore the blame, is on his shoulders. What Isaiah is saying, there will come a time when all government, when all responsibility, authority, and blame and all those things will be carried by this baby. Before Jesus came along, we could be tempted to blame ourselves, right? That's human nature. What have I done to deserve this? That's great. You can use that. That's human. We can carry the responsibility for everything that happens to us and for us and by us and everything else. But this baby, this Son of God Almighty, died on a cross once and for all. A sacrifice, forgiving anything and everything and demonstrating an unshakable, undeniable love for everyone so that our inner monologue that says, I deserve this or I deserve that, is shattered. Instead, it's all on Jesus, on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. The zeal. I love that word. Jesus himself once told a story that illustrates the zeal of the Lord Almighty. There were two brothers. You might know this story. The younger brother says to his father, I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance. And the father does. Younger brother goes off and enjoys his massive payday in the big city. Wine, women, good food and friends. Until he runs out of money. And there's a drought. His friends desert him. And he gets a job eventually feeding pigs. He even considers eating the pig food. He's so hungry, but no one is there to help him. Destitute, deserted, desperate. It is hopeless and dark. But he comes to his senses. He repents. He thinks about his dad, his father that he basically disowned, disrespected and disappointed, and he decides to go back to his father and to beg to be taken on as one of the hired hands. He figures that his father's employees at least get fed. But he's not sure his father will even hire him. In his mind, it's a gamble. He tries to improve his chances by making up a speech. A speech that says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." Look at what is at the heart of that speech. I am no longer worthy. A darkness of the soul, a hopelessness and condemnation that he lives. So he begins walking, rehearsing this speech, but his father is on the lookout. And he sees the younger son. He's returning in hopelessness and humiliation and shame, so he runs to him. He throws his arms around him. The boy starts to give his speech. I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to call your son. And the father ignores it. Shut up, he says. Instead, he responds by calling the servants. He puts on a robe he puts a robe on the son. He puts a ring on the son's finger, giving him authority, and sandals on him, and he calls for a party. In Jesus' story, of course, the Father is God. And the simple truth that he illustrates is that whoever decides to come to God, no matter how unworthy they feel, no matter what they've done, no matter if they spit in the face of God himself, if they come back to God, they are restored. No questions, no speeches required, no shame accepted. The yoke on the back of the young brother was broken. He was free from the rod that he used to beat himself up with. Of course, that's not the reason Jesus actually tells that story. But nonetheless, there is a great picture of the ridiculous love, the zeal that stands at the heart of Jesus' life and ministry. At Christmas time, we celebrate the birth of God into the world. God born and put in a stinking feed trough in a shed because his parents were homeless. God born to a 13, 14-year-old unwed peasant girl. We're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus. He experienced human existence right from birth, the messiest of it, the darkest of it. He experienced joy. He experienced longing. He experienced rejection, curiosity, laughter, humiliation, and everything else there is that is essential to being human. And he still died for all of us. He still said, "You are worthy." He still says, "You are worthy. You aren't finished. You aren't done. There is no closed door. It is not hopeless." In fact, he says, there won't even ever really be an end to your life. I don't know what kind of hopelessness you may be experiencing or feeling. I don't know what kind of hopelessness you may see others feeling this Christmas. But one thing that I want everyone to be aware of is that he has taken the government on his shoulders. No longer do we blame ourselves. No longer can we beat ourselves up. No longer can we condemn ourselves or condemn others. Instead, this Christmas, may the light of the love of God that brings hope be experienced by all, whether they simply come to us for a gift card or whether or not they're a family member, whether or not they are a neighbor. May that message of hope, deep, soul-freeing hope, be felt by all we come into contact with. Shopping centres, parking lots, or here in our foyer. We're going to sing a song. a new song, which I mean Jason is going to sing it, and we're going to listen and learn it. But it's going to be a time of prayer. And I wonder where you sit with that message. Maybe you're in a bit of life situation right now where you're tempted to think, what have I done to deserve this? Maybe you're tempted to think that there is something deep down within you, some part of your life, psyche, history, whatever, that makes you feel like you're unworthy of the love and connection of God. May this birth of this baby, his life, his teaching, his death and his resurrection tell you once and for all, you are worthy. And may that hope guide you and drive you forever. Let's sing this song. If you would like to come and to pray, to thank God, or maybe you're struggling with the idea that maybe you're not worthy, maybe you need to come and to pray and to hear God say to you, have hope. Take heart. I have overcome the world. Let's sing the song.